The importance of sleep and its influence on alertness and performance is well known in high-risk environments. Today's guest has advised some of the highest performers in the most demanding contexts, such as NASA astronauts on the International Space Station. I'm James Hewitt, and this is High Performance Talks, a show dedicated to finding inspirational ways to improve performance through better health and well-being. In each episode, you'll hear personal stories from high-performing individuals, ranging from top executives and entrepreneurs to world champion athletes and scientists. In this episode, I'll be talking to Professor Steven Lockley. Professor Lockley is an Associate Professor of Medicine at Harvard Medical School, Neuroscientist in the Division of Sleep and Circadian Disorders, and a member of Hintsa's Science Board. We talk about the importance of light, how this relates to sleep and alertness, and explore a range of questions, including some of the reasons why so many of us struggle with sleep, why this matters, and what we can do about it. Thanks for speaking to us today, Steve. I'm really interested to talk with you because obviously sleep and recovery is a really important component in the Hintsa program in our services, but it's also an increasingly popular topic in the media. It seems to be at the forefront of people's minds. But please, can you tell us a little bit about what was it or who was it that inspired you to start studying and exploring this area?
Thanks, James. You're right. Sleep is a very important topic. And I sort of fell into it by accident. I was applying to do PhDs at a range of different universities in the UK and was offered the opportunity to do a PhD on sleep in blind people. And from first blush, you think, well, that why is that important? What's the reason for doing that? But it became very interesting to me in trying to understand how light affects our clock. And as I learned very early on in my training, light is a very important component of our circadian clock and our sleep-wake regulation. And so my PhD work was really concerned with trying to understand how different types of blindness or different severity of blindness affects circadian rhythms and sleep. If we live in a light-dark environment, a 24-hour day, and if we have eyes that can detect light, we line up at the right time of day according to our internal clock and our external light exposure. But some people have a clock which is faster than others, and those people tend to be morning types. And other people have a clock which is slightly longer than others, and those people tend to be evening types. And so where we line up in the world is determined by our internal clock, which is different, slightly different between us, and also how light interacts with our clock. But if we lose that ability to detect light, if we live in a cave without light, or if we were to lose our eyes tonight, then tomorrow we would start to run on our own internal time, which is on a non-24-hour day. In blind people, it's around 24 and a half hours. So that means trying to go to sleep half an hour later every day for the rest of your life. And this is a similar problem, but in fact a bit more severe than what people experience with jet lag or with shift work, where your internal clock is out of sync with the outside world. And so light is a really key component of our sleep-wake regulation, the timing of sleep, and also performance and mood and other things which the clock controls. And so if we don't get the light-dark cycle right, then everything that the clock controls also starts to become problematic.
So one of the things you mentioned there was that there is this variation in, I think it's called chronotype, the length of our circadian rhythm. How many people do you think are actually really aware of what their natural predisposition to being a lark or an owl, somebody who prefers mornings or prefers evenings is? Because it seems that our society is so disrupted by artificial light. Does anyone really get the chance to discover it? And related to that, if they do, what is there some evidence, some data around the distribution of larks and owls in a normal population?
So it's a very good question about how well we can judge our own natural sleep patterns. We don't really know because we all sleep with electric light, and so in order to really understand our natural sleep need on natural sleep duration or on natural sleep timing, you'd want to sleep without natural light for a few weeks, because you'd want to try and understand, if you took the world away and all the pressures of work and family and social life and the electric light, which is keeping us awake in the evening, what that would naturally be. And a lot of people consider themselves short sleepers, or people who don't need very much sleep to function. And that probably isn't the case in a natural environment. We are overriding our natural sleep need and our sleepiness through things like light, which keeps us awake, but also caffeine, stress, other stimulants, which might override our natural patterns. And so in order to really work out how much of a morning or evening type you are and how long you really need to sleep, you would want to have a period of time, ideally a few weeks, but even longer if possible, where you didn't have any of those external influences and you would sleep at your natural pattern. Now, when people have done that experimentally, we find that for the first few days, you're paying off a sleep debt. You sleep for a very long time, 13, 14, 15 hours. But then we find that in young people, young, I mean 18 to 30, we find that people hit a level of around 8.5 hours of sleep a night. When a similar study is done in older people over 65s, they hit an asymptote of around 7.5 hours a day of total sleep time. So most of us don't sleep this amount, whether we're younger or older. We probably don't get that amount. And that may be for a number of different reasons. But most of us in society are probably sleep deprived to some extent. We don't get our natural requirement each and every day. But those experiments didn't look at timing of sleep. And so you would want to have a natural pattern to look at the timing. And we would find that some people would be early and some people would be late based on their internal clock. But as you know, that also changes with age. As we get older, we tend to get more morning type. We tend to wake up earlier in the morning and go to sleep earlier. And that's in part because of changes in another system that regulates sleep, which is the homeostat, the regulation of the amount of sleep based on how long you've been awake. And so your morningness or eveningness is not only driven by your clock, it's also driven by another system. And so we can't always assign that change to the clock, but it does give us at least an insight into where you might be in terms of someone with a very quick or a very slow clock at different points in your life. One of the key points of life where we see a real influence of chronotype and the clock on sleep is for teenagers. And so, as you may remember, as you go through your adolescent years, you want to go to sleep much later and wake up much later than you did before puberty. It kicks in. And this is because through adolescence, our clocks shift 2 to 3 hours later than when we were younger children. And this means that we can't go to sleep as early as we could before and have to stay up later. The problem is, of course, that you have to get up for school or in young adulthood have to get up for college. And so we have this problem where the biological clock is sending you to sleep later, and you can't really override that. You can't just say, well, I'm going to go to sleep early now. But your needs to get up for school in the morning mean that you systematically shorten sleep. And so we have a real issue with teenagers being systematically sleep deprived because their clock is pushing them later and society makes them get up too early. And so that's a more extreme example of some of the issues that evening type people might have, because their biology pushes them later, but society still seems to value being early to wake, early to rise. It doesn't necessarily make you healthy and wise. And so we really should think in society and think of our workforce and think of our schedules in terms of how we might allow people flexibility in their schedules to reflect their differences in biological time. We're not getting the best out of people if we make an evening type person come to work at 7 a.m. in the morning. They're going to be much more productive, especially in the early part of the day, if they can come in later. Similarly, having a morning type person stay late at work and work through till 9 and 10 in the evening is not going to be productive and efficient. They're going to be flagging at that point, but they're going to be much better earlier in the day. And so trying to understand your own internal clock to some extent, and then try and encourage employers and your own schedule to reflect that will mean that people try and sleep and wake at a more appropriate time, and will find that they sleep better because they're sleeping with their clock, and they'll be more productive in the day because they won't be fighting the clock in terms of the performance rhythm that is also regulated by this clock.
I think this is such an interesting topic because so much of what you're saying comes into conflict with many of the cultural pressures that we see. And I'm thinking in particular that there seems to be this emerging archetype in the media at the moment of what I sometimes call the superhero CEO, who gets up at 3:45 a.m. every day to do their non-negotiable workout, and they've done more before 6 a.m. than most of us do by the time we go to sleep. And I wonder whether actually that message could be quite unhelpful for some people, that actually maybe we're kind of forcing people into these unnatural rhythms, not just in school and educational settings, but in the workplace as well. And do you, in your work and in your practice, do you think that there is any increasing awareness of these individual differences in sleep, and particularly in the timing of sleep-wake cycles?
Well, I agree that there's certainly a subset of the workforce who think that's the right thing to do. To that sleep is a waste. I can sleep when I'm dead. I'm not getting anything done when I'm sleeping, and that's really a mistake. We're finding more and more that sleep is important for all aspects of our physical health and our mental health. And so, really, burning the candle at both ends, it is something that we should discourage, and something which we should make sure our workforce doesn't do. It really isn't the example to set. And I'll give you some examples of why that's the case. First of all, we find it very difficult to judge our own sleepiness and our own abilities. And so if you ask people subjectively how sleepy they are, it doesn't really match their objective performance. And in fact, it goes the other way to some extent. In some cases, people are getting worse and worse in their measured performance, but they subjectively think they're getting better. And there's a little bit of a manic impact of sleep loss. And if you stayed awake all night, that feeling in the next morning, you feel pretty good the next morning. Your clock is making you wake up a bit, and you've got this sort of overstimulation of being awake all night. But then, by noon, you sort of fall off a cliff and feel terrible. So your subjective self-assessment of performance is very poor. So you think you're doing a lot better than you really are. A sleepy brain you can think of as being like a drunk brain. If you've had a few drinks, your judgment, your abilities to judge yourself are impaired. And a sleepy brain is the same. A sleepy brain cannot judge itself. So people think they're doing well because they're not sleeping much. First of all, they're not doing well as they think. But then they are not doing as well as they could, because we know when we give people more sleep, their performance improves. And the people who walk around saying, well, I only get 4 hours a night and I do great and I feel great, they are successful, if they are successful, not because of the 4 hours of sleep a night, but despite 4 hours of sleep a night. And I work with lots of elite individuals, whether that's in business or sport or Formula One. And it's hard to tell brilliant people that they could be even more brilliant. But that's what we're talking about when we're talking about short sleepers. There are really very few genuine endogenous short sleepers. Most people, when you put them in the lab, sleep longer than they do because they're carrying around this sleep debt. And so we really do need to get rid of this sort of macho idea that I can sleep when I'm dead and sleep's a waste of time, because it isn't. You learn when you sleep, first of all. And so if you've learned something today and don't sleep tonight, the brain doesn't make that memory. And so you're wasting your time in school or in college or in business if you're trying to learn or gain experience or gain insight. Because unless you allow the brain to sleep and consolidate that memory, it's gone. And some very good studies have shown this for simple tests, but also for things like executive function and insight, which CEOs would judge themselves on, the ability to make those connections. Sleep is a really important factor. And so if you have more sleep, you'll do a better job of making those connections. And we know that because how often do people say, well, sleep on it and come back to me in the morning? And when they do, they come back with a different idea, a different concept, an improvement, because the brain has consolidated that information and now gives you the better tools. So for memory and learning, sleep is absolutely key. For brain health, sleep is absolutely key. We're learning more and more that sleep is really the time where the brain, sort of clears itself out in the night. It gets rid of build-up from the processes through the day that it doesn't need, and sort of cleans the brain out, so we're ready when we wake up. And so in terms of brain health and mental health, sleep is absolutely key. And we know there's a very strong relationship, a bidirectional relationship between sleep and depression. People who don't sleep enough have a much higher risk of depression, and people who are depressed have much poorer sleep. And so if you're maintaining good mental health, sleep is absolutely key. In terms of short-term health, and we think about short-term health in terms of things like accidents and injuries, sleep is, again, absolutely vital. You make about 30% more errors or have 30% more accidents and injuries on a night shift compared to a day shift. And that's taken into account all sorts of different shift patterns, shift durations, work at night or outside of your biological day means you don't perform as well. You have more accidents and injuries, and that's very, very well established. The risk of driving home after a 24-hour shift for a doctor is 2.5 times higher than driving home after a normal shift. And so we know that the risk of drowsy driving is very much impacted by sleep. And so if you're only sleeping 4 hours a night, you shouldn't be on the road. You're not safe to drive, and you're a risk to yourself, and more importantly, a risk to others on the road. And then if we think of chronic health, we're increasingly learning that short sleepers have a higher risk of chronic diseases like diabetes, heart disease, some types of cancer, depression, because the brain needs that sleep to recover. And so short sleep will increase your risk of all of these diseases. And so it's just not a good strategy for short-term health and safety, long-term health, and good brain health and mental health function. So we've got to get away from this idea that short sleep is a good thing to do, and it shows real drive, real commitment. It's a mistake. It's an error. We shouldn't be trying to mimic that. We should try and have schedules that prioritize sleep, maybe even over exercise and diet. And that's something where we're learning more and more. The exercise and diet lobby have been working 30 odd years to convince people to do this. The sleep field is really only just starting in that regard over the past decade. But we find that sometimes sleep is more important than some of those well-established risk factors in terms of health, and may be more important than things like exercise and diet. And so sleep has to be prioritized, and it's worth it. You'll do better, your company will do better, your employees will do better if you prioritize sleep.
An incredible number of people at the moment seem to report sleep problems. And so if at a company level they wanted to try and understand what was going on in terms of their employees' sleep and then try and find ways to improve it, how would you suggest that they approach that?
So there's a number of ways that an employer can help its employees get better sleep, but also set up better systems to allow people to sleep better and be more alert and productive at work. And so if that company does shifts, has night work, then looking at the type of schedule that people have is key. There are good ways and bad ways to schedule shifts. And so there are some principles that we might apply in terms of shift development so that you can help sleep and help alertness. And some of those, for example, that people realize already, you need to rotate a shift in a forward direction, getting later morning, evening, night shift, for example, is better than going evening, afternoon, morning in terms of the order. And so we know that the way that you plan a shift, the duration of the shift, reducing the number of consecutive nights of shift work and so on, can have a major impact on the health and safety. So if a business has night work, has 24-hour work, looking at the schedules can be a key component. We can also use better lighting in the workplace. If you've got brighter blue enriched light, people will see better and they will be more alert, make fewer mistakes and be more productive. Whether that's an office or a school or a factory, we can look at the lighting and have the light provide the better environment for alertness. We can also, though, look at the health of the employees. And I think this is an important, potentially important area where the long-term health of employees can be improved through screening programs for sleep disorders. So often workplaces will have health programs to look at blood pressure or anti-smoking or cholesterol levels, and we need to add sleep disorders to that. It's relatively straightforward for people to get an idea of their risk of a sleep disorder through validated questionnaires. There are a number of validated questionnaires which give you a good sense of whether you're at a high risk or not. And so employees could, every 1 year, every 2 years, complete that. And then if they seem to be at high risk of a sleep disorder, they can be referred for help to a sleep clinic or to their primary care physician, or even to workplace programs. We've established sleep disorder screening and treatment programs in workplaces to get people the access. We need to do that in an informed way. We can't have people, complete that information and then lose their jobs because they've got a sleep disorder. It's about trying to be proactive and prevent accidents and injuries due to sleep loss. And so it needs to be established in a way that is positive and gives people the opportunity to then get treatment. But we found that can be, quite a rewarding and quite a good return on investment in terms of savings in healthcare costs in the future and savings in the short-term risk of injuries and accidents. And so a sleep disorders screening program as part of the general well-being and health program of a workforce would be very effective and would get at some of those underlying sleep disorders that people have, which then will help with the other types of things you could do around sleep. There's no good giving people better lighting if they've got sleep apnea that's not diagnosed, for example. You need to get the sleep apnea sorted as well. And the sleep disorder prevalence is higher than we think. We think that, up to sometimes 40% of workforces have an undiagnosed sleep disorder. We've done some work with police officers and firefighters and found that indeed between 30 and 40% of on-duty active firefighters and police officers have a sleep disorder. And so in those dangerous occupations where people are working around the clock and in potentially life-threatening situations, they really need to be at their most alert. And so we've been able to develop screening and treatment programs for police and firefighters to get them the help they need. And in one study of a medium-sized fire department, we were able to reduce the long-term disability days by nearly 50% by having this education and screening, sleep disorder screening program. So it can be quite a substantial return on safety and health. Other studies have looked at sleep apnea risk in truck drivers and again found multiple-fold savings in healthcare costs compared to the cost of the screening in the first place. So thousands of dollars of healthcare savings based on hundreds of dollars of investment in the program. So it's good business to do this because you're going to save money long-term as well as decrease those short-term accidents and injuries. And so thinking of your workplace environment, access to daylight is important. If you don't have daylight, access to blue and rich light. Look at shift patterns and try and optimize the shift patterns. And then a sleep disorder screening and education program can be very beneficial to getting a better general level of health and have impact on workplace safety and productivity.
Yeah, those are really high impact statistics and really quite sobering when you think that often it seems that it's the people who need to focus the most who end up being the most fatigued in these different professions, and great to have a practical way that people might be able to measure and screen for this and then do something about it. And if I think about many of the executives and knowledge workers that we work with, they have very demanding schedules. They're traveling across multiple time zones regularly, but even if they're not actually physically traveling, many of the people that we work with have to do conference calls, for example, with colleagues or clients in completely different time zones. And so they're continuously adapting their time zones, even if it's not work related. I think a lot of people have had the experience of staying up super late watching Netflix as it kind of auto plays the next episode. I think Reed Hastings, CEO of Netflix, recently suggested that the biggest competition is business spaces right now is our need to sleep. So it sounds like many people probably are experiencing some form of jet lag, whether they're travelling or not. Perhaps we're all jet lagged without realising it.
We are, and I've written about that in the past and sort of called it mini jet lag. Other people call it social jet lag, if you've come across that term. And this is the idea that even if you don't travel, the fact that you change your sleep-wake and light-dark cycle each day, you're inducing shifts in the clock, which are similar, but probably not quite as extensive as a trip overseas. And so if you go to bed 2 hours later tonight, that's like traveling 2 hours west in terms of your biological time. Go to bed an hour earlier is an hour east. And so that wobble, if you like, that change day to day is a problem. And you can think of this the circadian adaptation as a continuum, with shift workers at the far end of one side. So shift workers, if you like, have the biggest wobble because they go from day to night to day to night and are continually shifting by as much as 12 hours sometimes between their work and sleep schedules. On the other end of that continuum would be someone who never, ever wobbled and who slept 8 hours a night and went to bed at the same time every night without fail. Most people can't do that, but that's sort of the extreme end of the continuum. So in the middle are most of us who wobble every day in terms of our timing. And the more we wobble and the bigger the wobble, the more problems I would expect with this mini jet lag each and every day. And so stability of light, dark, and sleep-wake cycles is absolutely key. And some new work that we've been doing with undergraduate students and with children with autism shows us that it's not just the duration of sleep that matters, but the regularity and the stability of the pattern. And so even if you might sleep 8 hours a night, if you're sleeping 8 hours and you're changing the timing of that sleep regularly, you're not getting the most out of that sleep. Similarly, if you don't sleep enough, but sleep very regularly, you're not getting enough out of that sleep either, because you're not getting the benefits of the sleep duration. And so ideally, we need to sleep for a good, a long chunk of time, and 7 to 9 hours was what you mentioned. And that's a good recommendation. But we want it to be as much as possible at the same time every night. And that will help the sleep system reset itself to sleep at the right circadian time, which means you'll have better quality sleep because you'll be sleeping at the right time, but also allow the light dark cycle exposure that you have to stabilize your circadian rhythms. And that will also help improve sleep and daytime function, because sleep gates light. When you close your eyes, you're essentially giving the eyes a dark pulse for the light dark cycle. So regularity is absolutely key. And of course, in the real world, we have to do things at unusual times, and we can't just do the same thing every night. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. And it really is about planning and prioritization. And so the questions would be, well, do I really have to do the telecom at that time? Do I really have to travel to that meeting? Do we really have to have a 7 a.m. meeting? Question yourself, question your colleagues, question your employer. And employers think, what can I do to really help give people flexibility, in order to try and then prioritize sleep. And so sometimes we have to say no to things, first of all. But then if we can't say no to things, then we have to plan ahead. And so if you have to stay up all night for a meeting overseas, then try and get some extra sleep beforehand and try and plan for the recovery. So you can't just think, okay, well, I'll get a nap in the afternoon, or I'll fall asleep on the sofa early. That's not good enough. If you know you're going to be sleep deprived, plan to try and put a bit of sleep in the sleep bank before then, but plan a proper recovery, prioritize recovery time after those events to make sure you catch up on some of that sleep at least, and get the benefits of it. And as I said earlier, if you don't sleep, you don't learn. And so there's no point staying up all night and doing all this stuff if then you don't sleep, because you're wasting your time. You're not going to learn or gain anything from doing that. But if you can schedule things to be more convenient, do so, prioritize that, and prioritize the sleep time.
So it sounds like you can put something into the sleep bank. If so, how much can you put in, and how long can you draw on that sleep bank before you get overdrawn?
Yeah. So sadly, you can't put much in the sleep bank, and it doesn't stay there very long. much like most of our salaries, sadly. So you can't really store sleep in more than a day or two. When I say put something in the sleep bank, what I mean there is, if you're going to have a very long day tomorrow, try and sleep an hour or two more tonight. And that's really the time scale that we're talking about. It's a day or two of reducing the sleep pressure that you can do by having a bit of extra sleep beforehand. But it really is that shorter space of time. What I do today isn't going to help me necessarily in a week's time. It's about a day or two's impact. And in terms of sort of recovering sleep, again, it's a very short time scale. You need to recover the sleep, the next day, really. You can't recover the sleep in a week's time. And just let me give you a sort of practical example of why it's really just not possible mathematically. If you only sleep, 5 hours a night for a week, for a work week, and let's say you've lost 2 hours of sleep a night on those nights, you've got 10 hours of sleep to catch up on the weekend. That means you've got to sleep now 12 hours a night on Saturday and Sunday, which you're not going to be able to do. And you're not getting the same quality of sleep because the timing of sleep, the duration of sleep affects the type in terms of depth and quality. And so it isn't just about the duration, it's also about the timing and the type of sleep you're having. And so even after a few days of having a couple of hours of sleep loss, you just physically can't catch it up, in terms of the simple arithmetic, never mind any of the biological benefits. And so the sleep bank, I'm afraid, is a very short span. The day or two before you have sleep deprivation, try and have a little bit extra. And what you're doing there is reducing the sleep pressure. You're reducing the level of sleepiness that you're at when you start then whatever event it is that you need to do. But then when you've completed that event, you really need to recover in the next day or two. You're not going to have weeks to do that because by the time, in 2 weeks' time, you've got other debt to deal with because, you've not been sleeping 8 hours a night after that. So very short scale, I'm afraid. We can't bank things over more than a day or two.
So, one of the coping strategies which I hear a lot is that people accept or believe that they have to accept that their sleep will be restricted through the working week. It will be inconsistent, it will be short, and then they try and recover it all at the weekend, and they'll sleep for these kind of particularly extended periods on maybe Friday night, Saturday night, maybe Sunday, if they can go to bed early. But from the sounds of it, do you think they might actually be doing more harm than good in some ways by sleeping 10, 11 hours? Because they're going to be changing their sleep-wake timings again. That maybe they're going to induce even more of this kind of small jet lag or social jet lag. What advice would you have for people who are doing this? Is it worth doing, or should they maybe try and adopt a different strategy?
In a perfect world, you'd adopt a different strategy and you'd have more sleep in the week, so you didn't have that need for to catch up on sleep at the weekend. And so, yes, a different strategy would be good there, but of course that's difficult for many people. What we don't know at this point is much about the payoff between duration and regularity. And so I mentioned earlier that we're finding that sleep regularity is becoming more and more important, and that's true. We know that's the case, but we've never yet done the full interaction effect to really know, well, how much regularity equals how much sleep duration. So at this point, I would have to say that, all sleep is good to some extent. And so if you can catch up, if you do have a sleep debt, then certainly you should to try and recover. And so I'm not going to say don't sleep more at weekend. But in time, we may find that isn't necessarily the best strategy once we understand the link between duration and regularity. But for now, yes, do that sleep, catch up on that sleep. But the more fundamental question would be to try and change the overall pattern to get slightly more in the week, even if you can't get the full 7 to 9 hours. Try and keep that as regular as you can. Try to say no to some things and prioritize and protect your sleep. And then if you still need to catch up at the weekends, again, do so. A bigger problem that often happens at the weekend tends to be that people sleep later than they do in the week because they want to go out and do things socially later. And so what that tends to do is push our clocks later and lead to those Monday morning blues, because as you shift your clock a couple of hours later on a Friday and a Saturday night, when you try to get up for work at 6 a.m. on a Monday morning, it's really like getting up at 3 a.m. if you've shifted your clock by 3 hours. And so that's another thing to think about over the weekend. If you are going out on a Friday or Saturday night, you've shifted your clock later. So on the Sunday, you really need to try and go to sleep and avoid light earlier, so that you alleviate a little bit of that shift and may have a better experience on a Monday. And we know that can have a real impact. When we go to where we change our clocks and lose an hour of sleep with the daylight savings change, road accidents go up by 17% the Monday morning after we lose an hour, and heart attacks go up by 5% in the 3 weeks after we lose an hour. And so although none of us really think that's that important, you think, oh, an hour of sleep, that's neither here nor there. When everybody does it, accidents go up and health is worse. And so that shows the importance of even as little as an hour of sleep on your safety and health.
I mean, we've covered an awful lot of ground today, but is there anything else that you'd like to share with the listeners, any other key takeaways or recommendations that you'd like to leave with us?
I think the key thing is about prioritizing sleep. We haven't spent as a society as much time and given as much importance to sleep as we should have done. We do focus a little bit too much on, maybe not too much, a little bit on diet and exercise, maybe at the expense of sleep. And so I'd like to make the case for bringing sleep up in the priorities of everyone. We know that's going to have good short-term benefits on your accident risk and safety and health. We know it's going to have good long-term benefits on learning and long-term health and risk of chronic diseases. So it just needs people, though, to take the leap. And it's hard to be the only student who doesn't do the all-nighter before the exam. But if you have better sleep in the week before the exam, you don't need the all-nighter the night before because you'll have learned more in the week before. It's hard to be the executive that allows their workforce not to come in at 6 o'clock in the morning because we know that's going to have impaired their sleep. It's hard to be the leader who says, no, you will all get 8 and 9 hours of sleep a night because I know that's going to make you more productive. It takes some bravery, some leadership for people to take that leap and put that time aside for sleep. But what I would like to encourage people to do is to do that, because I think you'll find pretty quickly that rewards are worthwhile. People will be more productive. They will be more alert. They will do a better job. They will have better insight. They'll also be happier. They'll be less irritable. They'll be, they'll be less angry in meetings. All those things which we know sleep deprivation causes will start to go away. And so people should take that leap in their personal lives and prioritize sleep over some of their other important priorities. And for businesses, let your business sleep. Put that time aside. You will find that the rewards come back far more than the odd extra hour that you would have got by burning the candle at both ends. But it does take a little bit of leadership. It does take some bravery to do that. It's hard to be the first to prioritize sleep and not every work hour. But I strongly encourage everyone to try it. You will find a benefit, and then you can spread that message of good sleep and good health even further.
That's fantastic. And that's a great message to conclude. Take a leap into sleep. You've been listening to High Performance Talks, brought to you by Hintsa Performance, the leading provider of human high performance coaching and digital wellbeing services. Thanks to today's guest, Professor Steven Lockley. You can find all the episodes of High Performance Talks in Hintsa's newsroom at hintsa.com/newsroom. That's HINTSA.com/newsroom. The full version of this interview is also available through our Better Life coaching service. The host of the show is me, James Hewitt. Our producer is Nora Jarnefelt. If you liked what you heard, please rate us and share this episode with your friends.